and the head protocol officer of the Vatican State Signatura. He controls canon law changes and the chief of the Office of Secretariat of State. Now, let's forget all of that for just a moment and be practical. If you had a Holy Roman Catholic Church, what would your expectations be at our present position in time? Well, I don't know what you would expect. Let me tell you what I would expect. First of all, I would expect a cutting away of the Vatican-Moscow alliance. How can the Vatican, if it's holy, abide by the Soviet Union? I would expect to hear some condemnation of the New World Order. I haven't heard a word, have you? I couldn't imagine that the Catholic Church could support the United Nations. Just briefly tap into the United Nations. John Cowles, Advisory Council of the U.S. Committee for the UN in 1959 stated that the traditional American concept of national sovereignty is obsolete. Alger Hiss, a communist, went to prison for it, was the first chairman of the United Nations and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Felix Frankfurter was one of the founders of the ACLU. William Zoster was head of the U.S. Communist Party. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was a top Communist Party official. Dr. Harry F. Ward of the Union Theological Seminary was a member of a Communist Front. All for the United Nations. The three attorneys who ruled that the UN was constitutional were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. All of the men who drafted the original proposal of the Steering Committee for the United Nations were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. The U.S. delegation to the United Nations founding in 1945 included over 40 Council on Foreign Relations members. Here's the prayer of the United Nations. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men, let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men, may Christ return to earth. From the center, where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Do you know that the United Nations is the home of Lucis Trust? Do you know that the United Nations is the home of Lucis Trust, which used to be called Lucifer Trust? But in the early part of this century, that was a little much for people to take. So they changed it to Lucis Trust. And Alice Bailey, who was head of Lucifer Trust, told her followers, quote, "It must be remembered that the forerunner of all movements which appear upon the physical plane is educational propaganda," which is what has been going on in this country for over a century, and it's why there are so few people here tonight. She said, Alice Bailey, the three main channels through which the preparation for the new age is going on might be regarded as the church, the Masonic fraternity, and the educational field. John Paul calls for the end of sovereignty for the United States and other countries, the end of absolute property rights, the end of gun rights, the new international economic order, the redistribution of wealth and jobs. He calls for nations to trust the United Nations. He calls for total disarmament. He promotes the United Nations as the hope for peace. He promotes UNESCO. To the astonishment of many Catholics, John Paul II told the Director General of UNESCO that since the birth of UNESCO, the Catholic Church has always carefully followed the UNESCO program. You know where UNESCO came from? It came from a man named Archibald MacLeish. Do you know Archibald MacLeish is a member of the Order of Skull and Bones, of which George Bush is a member? Well, let me tell you just a little bit about the United Nations. Secretary General of the United Nations, at one time he was Secretary General, U Thant, quote, praised Lenin as a political leader whose ideals were reflected in the United Nations Charter. Let me read that again, just so you get the full impact of this. U Thant, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations, praised Lenin as a political leader whose ideals were reflected in the United Nations Charter, developed by the Council on Foreign Relations and at this time supported by the Vatican. Birds of a feather, folks, flock together. Birds of a feather flock together. You know the story of St. John the Apostle. He wanted to take a shower in one of the Roman shower stalls, and there was what he deemed a heretic in the stalls at that point in time. Remember this story? And he decided to head in the other direction and remain dirty rather than get in that shower stall with that fellow, because he was afraid that God would hit the place with lightning and destroy it. And the fact of the matter is, when he stands at the United Nations and just stands there and has his picture taken, he is validating that organization. And the United Nations, my friends, is right out of the pit of hell. We wouldn't expect him to promote ecumenism, especially if he's read Mortalium Animos. You have no idea how hard it is to obtain this. This little encyclical has disappeared off the face of the earth. I called Brother Michael and a number of other people in order to try to obtain it. I finally did obtain it. But they do not want anyone to see this encyclical, especially a modern-day priest. Now, there's no more... this basically condemns ecumenism. Mortalium Animos.
What does it mean in English?
Death of the soul. On fostering true religious unity. Encyclical of Pope Pius XI, January the 6th, 1928.
This monastery, princess.
You get it now? Can't get it right now. Angelus Press has it now. Another thing I would expect is some condemnation of the New Age. I might expect some condemnation of divination, perhaps, or Freemasonry, or witchcraft. I might expect that Teilhard de Chardin or Father Matthew Fox might be excommunicated. But that would be too much to hope for. I might expect to hear some comment on homosexuality or lesbianism or pedophilia or child ritual abuse. But no, I don't. I don't hear any support for nationhood. What do I hear from the Vatican? I hear promotion of disarmament, promotion of the United Nations, promotion of world government. I hear no comment on Freemasonry, which is the same as promotion. I wouldn't really mind if you called them. They're in Longwood, Florida. The name of the church is